On the 7th of June 2000, a ruling was made in one of the most important cases in American business history. The District of Columbia ordered that Microsoft, the company Bill Gates founded in 1975, should be broken up in response to its abuse of US monopoly and antitrust laws. If the ruling went ahead, this would have been the biggest corporate dismantlement in the US since John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil in 1911. Ultimately, the decision was overturned on appeal, and Microsoft lost market share anyway to Apple and Google in the years that followed. But how had Microsoft managed to reach such a position of market dominance in the first place? This is the story of Bill Gates and the rise of Microsoft. The man known to history as Bill Gates was born William Henry Gates III on the 28th of October 1955 in Seattle, in Washington state. His father, William Henry Gates II, had joined the army during the Second World War, but arrived in Japan when the war was already over. After returning to Seattle, he obtained a law degree from the University of Washington and established a successful law practice. After his son achieved fame as Bill Gates, he began calling himself Bill Gates Sr. His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, came from a family of bankers. She was studying for a degree in education at the University of Washington when she met Bill's father. They were married in 1951. Their first child, a daughter named Christy, was born in early 1954, around 2 years before their son, Bill, while their youngest daughter, Libby, would follow almost a decade later in June 1964. Despite growing up there in the 1960s at the height of the Cold War, Seattle was a city with a sense of optimism during Bill's youth and one which was expanding rapidly in the post-war years. The city was home to aircraft manufacturer Boeing, which continued its wartime expansion by moving into civil aviation. When Bill was 6 years old, Seattle hosted the Century 21 Exposition, a World's Fair focused on space technology. The futuristic tower, known as the Space Needle, was constructed for the occasion and remains an iconic landmark in the city. Although he was a voracious reader, Bill was a restless child who found most of his school lessons uninteresting and frequently interrupted class. While mathematics appealed to his rational mind, he took little interest in other subjects. In order to offer him intellectual stimulation, his teacher, Mrs. Carlson, brought him to the school librarian, Blanche Caffier, who taught him the Dewey Decimal System of book classification and agreed to let him work as her assistant during lunch and other breaks. After school, Bill and Christy would sit at the family dinner table to hear updates about their parents' work. These discussions would foster within Bill a sense of civic responsibility that he carried with him into his adult years. In 1965, following the birth of Libby, the Gates family moved to a larger house, and Bill transferred to Laurelhurst Elementary. During his first year, after carrying out extensive research in the local library, he surprised his classmates by turning in a 177-page report on the small business-friendly state of Delaware, which he had learned about from his father. The young Bill aspired to be a scientist, and while he took up various sports and musical instruments at his mother's urging, he soon abandoned all of them. his school grades continued to be poor, and he regularly defied his parents and retreated into his room. His disciplinary issues prompted his parents to engage a therapist, Dr. Charles Cressy, who showed a genuine interest in understanding the boy's behavior. He continued to see the therapist for more than 2 years. As a young teenager, Gates often visited his father's law practice and had a sense of the important work that he was doing. The Gates family hosted dinner parties for leading members of Seattle society, including the state's governor, Dan Evans. Another regular visitor was Dr. Carl Edmark, a cardiologist who had invented a portable defibrillator and hired the Gates law firm to find outside investors. In 1967, 12-year-old Bill started studying at Lakeside, a private boys' college attended by the sons of the Seattle elite. There, Bill struck up a friendship with Kent Evans, a boy with strong views on politics who spent much of the summer campaigning for Hubert Humphrey against Richard Nixon. While Bill and Kent were considering what they would do in the future, their class was introduced to a teletype machine in the maths department, which connected to a computer in California via a phone line and enabled users to play games and write computer programs. The machine appealed to Bill's sense of rationality, and he soon began writing programs and developing games for the terminal. Although there were no formal computing classes, the presence of other boys gathered around the machine hoping to use it themselves encouraged Bill to write better code. His efforts attracted the attention of an older boy named Paul Allen, who began setting him challenges to solve. Meanwhile, Bill's interest in computers attracted the attention of Monique Rona, the mother of a classmate who was setting up a company called Computer Center Corp, which Gates nicknamed C-Cubed. She proposed giving the Lakeside boys free access to their new PDP-10 computer in return for documenting bugs and any other issues before the company made it available to commercial customers. Knowing that their free time was limited, a group of 4 Lakeside boys, including Bill, Kent, Paul Allen, and his friend Rick Weiland, spent much of December 1968 with the computer. Bill would often sneak out of the house in the middle of the night to work with it. In spring 1969, after C-Cubed began charging Lakeside for time on the computer, Gates and Allen discovered a security flaw that allowed them to log in with administrator rights. However, they were caught by their teacher and banned from using the computers. Although the young Gates was not interested in sports, he enjoyed the outdoors and was an enthusiastic member of the Boy Scouts. He befriended a scout leader named Mike Collier and was part of a small group that went on long hikes in difficult terrain. In his 2025 memoir, Source Code, Gates described taking a particularly grueling hike in June 1971, during which he passed the time by thinking about the programming project he was then working on and creating the most elegant code he had ever written in his head. By his mid-teens, Gates had also begun to take school seriously, and his efforts paid off with A and B grades across the board in 9th grade. By the time Gates started high school, Lakeside began offering an introductory computer science class. With the teacher Bob Haig busy working on a program to automatically schedule classes ahead of the school's anticipated merger with the local girls' school, Gates and his friends Kent Evans, Paul Allen, and Rick Weiland taught the class. Calling themselves the Lakeside Programming Group, the 4 tried to get free computer time from Information Sciences, Inc., a company based in Portland, Oregon. In exchange, ISI assigned the boys to write a program to automate payroll for one of its clients. The project was more complicated than anticipated and involved writing code in COBOL, which only Weiland knew. Nevertheless, by the time the Lakeside boys delivered their payroll program in March 1971, ISI executives were sufficiently impressed by their work to assign them future projects.
We just added a new desk to our office setup to help with our day-to-day editing. This is a standing desk from FlexiSpot, the sponsors of this video. The big advantage of these desks is you have the option to sit or stand. This helps enormously with comfort and usability. A previous employer of mine used these desks. He told me how they helped with fitness, comfort, and the ergonomics of desk use. Now that I've tried one myself, I can tell you he was absolutely right. They help alleviate strain, they help with circulation, and also help you stay active at work. These desks are stable and very well made. They are so flexible that whatever your height, you can find the right height for you. You can even sit on the desk while it's being moved into position with its 125 kilogram load-bearing capability. And whether moving or stationary, the stability of the desk is second to none. The lifting columns are built like precision joints, so the desk is powerful, efficient, and pretty much unshakable. You can store 4 heights with its smart controls, and its rock-solid legs are made from premium steel. If you are considering a change to your desk setup, then I would recommend you try the FlexiSpot. They are amazingly flexible. We tried the E7, which has a 15-year warranty and 30-day risk-free return service. Visit the website to see the E7 desk and the whole range of sale options they have. Just click the link in the description and use our promo code to save even more.
In 1971, Allen and Weiland prepared to graduate, leaving Evans and Gates to complete refining the payroll program for ISI. However, when ISI failed to honor its promises to give the boys more free computer time, Kent Evans sought help from Gates' father. The elder Gates sided with the boys and called the ISI president, who backed down and agreed to give the teenagers another $5,000 in computer time, formalized with a written agreement. Examining the paperwork decades later, Gates discovered that the Lakeside programmers had already used $25,000 worth of computing time while developing the payroll program. Upon returning to school after summer break, Gates found Lakeside in chaos as the scheduling program developed by the teacher Bob Haig failed to work properly. Gates and Evans agreed to help him fix it, and Gates soon developed a matrix that enabled him to map all of the variables, tackling the problem in a systematic manner that a computer could understand. After Bob Haig and a fellow teacher were killed in a light aircraft crash at the end of January, Gates and Evans were recruited by the headmaster to work on a temporary solution based on the existing code before Gates' solution could be implemented. The two boys skipped classes and worked long hours alongside 4 of their teachers over 3 weeks to develop a scheduling program that eliminated most of the problems. Their success encouraged Evans to suggest that they could write a proper class scheduling program based on Gates' solution, which could be sold to other educational institutions. Before they had the opportunity to realize these ambitions, Gates received a call from his headmaster on Monday the 29th of May 1972 that Kent Evans had been killed in a mountaineering accident during the weekend. Gates struggled to come to terms with the loss of his best friend, but he threw himself into computer work, spending the following month with Paul Allen working on the class scheduling program. Gates and Allen soon finished the program, forging a partnership that would lead to the formation of Microsoft 4 years later. Allen kept up to date with new advances in computing technology, and he was excited by advancements in silicon chip technology after Intel developed the 4004 microprocessor in late 1971. An Intel engineer named Gordon Moore predicted that technological advances would allow chips to become twice as powerful every 2 years. Moore's legendary prediction of the rapid development of computing technology has, so far, proven accurate and has come to be known as Moore's Law. Intel's latest chip, the 8008, was twice as powerful as its predecessor, though Gates recognized that it would be many years before the chips could process data quickly enough to make a home computer viable. Nevertheless, he believed the Intel chip was suited to a traffic counting program that he and Evans had been working on for the company Logic Simulation Co. During the summer of 1972, he pondered a career in politics and applied to Harvard. At the same time, he continued to pursue his interest in computers, and in January 1973, he and Allen were hired by TRW, a defense and technology contractor, leading a project to digitize the system of balancing electricity supply and demand for the Bonneville Power Administration, the federal authority that distributed electricity to the Pacific Coast states. While Gates received his Harvard admission letter in March, the TRW programmers and Paul Allen advised him to skip college. When Gates ignored their advice and left to begin his studies at Harvard, it led to a temporary rift between himself and Allen. Although Gates had indicated that he wanted to go into business or law in his Harvard application letter, he ended up taking classes in engineering and mathematics instead. While Harvard did not offer any undergraduate computer classes, he soon gained access to the university's computer lab, where he encountered a PDP-1, a predecessor to the familiar PDP-10, which was known for its graphic display capabilities despite being much slower. Gates hoped to connect the PDP-1 to the PDP-10 over a network to create a baseball game. The project was far more challenging than expected, and although he received an A, he was unable to reproduce a full game. By now, Gates' friends at Harvard were also urging him to quit and find a job in the computing industry. Gates decided to make several applications for programming jobs and received an offer from DEC, the company that made the PDP-10. Although Gates was impressed by DEC and felt that his abilities were valued by the interviewers, he rejected the offer and remained at Harvard for his second year. He had a habit of neglecting the classes he had applied for to sit in on other lectures he found interesting. He was glad to be reunited with Paul Allen, who had accepted a job offer at Honeywell and moved to Boston. The two frequently met for lunch, and Allen pitched his ideas on developing an inexpensive personal computer using Intel chips. Gates was hesitant to work on hardware and preferred to focus on developing software. Since they could not write software without hardware, the pair waited for a computer based on Intel's new 8080 microprocessor. In December 1974, Allen informed Gates of the new Altair, a personal computer kit developed by a company called MITS that could be bought unassembled for less than $400. After Allen wrote a program to simulate the Altair on the PDP-10, Gates wrote a version of the basic programming language that could be used on the Altair. When the pair proposed selling the software to MITS, Gates was informed by the company's president, Ed Roberts, that the Altair was still a prototype and was not yet ready to run the code. They would have to wait until the technology caught up with their work. With the help of a Harvard freshman named Monty Davidoff, Gates and Allen won the race to develop a program that could be used by MITS. Allen flew to meet the MITS team in New Mexico and demonstrated the code by entering the simple command 2 + 2, which the computer returned as 4. After Allen followed up by running a simple game on the device, Ed Roberts was suitably impressed and agreed to license the BASIC interpreter on the spot. He informed Allen that MITS had made the Altair as a last-ditch attempt to turn the company around, but he received far more orders than it could produce. Before signing the contract with MITS, Allen and Gates had to come up with a name for their new venture. On Allen's suggestion, they adopted the name Microsoft, since they would be writing software for microprocessors. In April 1975, Allen left for New Mexico to work on the software as an MITS employee. Back at Harvard, Gates faced disciplinary action for using Harvard's PDP-10, which had been supplied by the U.S. Department of Defense in 1969, for working on a commercial product and allowing Allen and Davidoff unauthorized access into the computer lab. Gates had avoided telling his parents about the programming work he was doing, but the prospect of being expelled led him to call his father and discuss the case. After writing a 10-page letter explaining his actions and apologizing for violating any rules, Gates received an admonishment, but no further punishment. The Altair enthralled not only Gates and Allen, but thousands of computer hobbyists across the United States who were eager to get hold of the machine. It inspired the creation of the Homebrew Computer Club in California, which brought together tens and then hundreds of tech enthusiasts. Among the members were Steve Wozniak and his friend Steve Jobs, who were inspired to develop a computer of their own that became the Apple I. During the summer of 1975, Gates was in Palo Alto at a demonstration of his BASIC program when someone stole a spare copy of the tape with the code, and before long, dozens of unauthorized copies of the pre-production code were being produced. Although the computer hobbyists of the time believed that software ought to be free, the Microsoft founders hoped to commercialize it. Gates spent the summer in Albuquerque working on BASIC, fixing existing bugs, and developing versions of the software with additional capabilities. While Allen was building development tools to enable further innovation, Gates took charge of the software development and business management, claiming a 60% share of the company. As the pair agreed to more work with MITS, they hired their old school friend, Rick Weiland, to help out. By the end of 1975, the company had received just over $16,000 in revenue. In order to focus on his work at Microsoft, Gates had skipped the first semester of the new academic year, but by February 1976, he was back at Harvard. Not long after, Microsoft signed a major deal with computer maker NCR for a version of the BASIC software. Gates had been frustrated that most hobbyists were using unlicensed software, prompting him to send them an open letter via the Homebrew Computer Club's newsletter explaining how much time Microsoft had spent developing the software and accusing them of theft. The letter appalled Ed Roberts, who instructed Gates to write an apology to the company's customer base, though Gates stuck to his central argument while adopting a more diplomatic tone. By summer 1976, the success of the Altair made it to the pages of Business Week magazine, anticipating a new era of personal computing beyond the world of hobbyists. Gates recognized that the success of MITS was not guaranteed to last and began diversifying the company's revenue streams by writing interpreters for other programming languages such as COBOL and Fortran. Under the terms of their contract with MITS, Microsoft would have to share half the revenues of any sub-licensing agreement for the Altair basic code, but Ed Roberts was becoming less cooperative. In November, Microsoft was officially incorporated in New Mexico, dropping the hyphen that it had carried for its first year. As the company received inquiries from a growing list of potential clients, Gates was granted additional leave from Harvard in January 1977 and never returned to complete his degree. In April, Gates went to the first West Coast Computer Fair in San Francisco, where he was astonished to see all the exhibits on personal computers. The event was the occasion of the first meeting between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and marked the beginning of a relationship characterized by both cooperation and competition. Meanwhile, Microsoft was embroiled in a legal dispute with MITS about rights to the 8080 BASIC program. With Microsoft facing cash flow problems owing to unpaid royalties from MITS, Gates signed a deal with Apple for a version of BASIC that would run on the new Apple II that helped keep the company afloat until the arbitrator in the legal dispute ruled in Microsoft's favor. The ruling ensured that by the end of 1977, Microsoft code was running on the Commodore PET II, the Apple II, and the Radio Shack TR-80, three machines that brought the personal computer revolution mainstream. After emerging out of the shadow of MITS, Gates and Allen moved Microsoft's headquarters to the Seattle suburb of Bellevue in January 1979. With BASIC, Gates had pioneered the licensing of software to manufacturers of computing hardware, a business model that would one day make him the richest man in the world. However, in Microsoft's early days, Gates complained that only a small fraction of users were paying for the software and that US federal copyright law was slow to catch up. As Microsoft operations expanded, Gates spent less time writing code and more time managing his growing team. He insisted on hiring the best and brightest minds across the country, though his reputation as a stern taskmaster affected retention rates. One of his most important hires was Steve Ballmer, a graduate student at Stanford who had been an old friend at Harvard. Gates persuaded Ballmer to join Microsoft as business manager. Microsoft's breakthrough came in July 1980 when IBM, the behemoth of the computing world, approached the company about software for its personal computer project. The connection was facilitated by Bill's mother, who knew IBM CEO John Opel. After agreeing to write a BASIC interpreter for IBM, Microsoft also secured the rights to supply an operating system for the IBM PC. Since Microsoft had never made an operating system before and would not have the time to develop its own, Gates acquired the full rights to a product developed by Seattle Computer Products called 86-DOS, which was renamed MS-DOS. As part of the deal, purchasers were required to sign a declaration that they could only use the software for a single machine. Although Microsoft only received a one-off $50,000 fee from IBM, the success of the IBM PC made DOS the de facto industry standard, enabling Microsoft to sell versions of the software to non-IBM customers. Microsoft also began selling a word processor developed by Charles Simonyi, a Hungarian-born programmer who joined the company in 1981. On the 25th of June 1981, the initial Gates-Allen partnership was dissolved, and Microsoft became a corporation registered in Washington state, with Gates as president and chairman, and Allen as vice president. In 1982, Allen was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma, requiring him to undergo intensive chemotherapy. When Allen's health issues forced him to leave the company in 1983, Gates rejected his offer to buy him out. Allen accordingly retained his stake in Microsoft and would become a billionaire as the company's fortunes soared after his departure. Microsoft's partnership with IBM heralded success not only in America, but in the European market. Microsoft established its international division in April 1982. The year 1983 proved to be a landmark year for the company with the release of Microsoft Word, the word processing software developed by Charles Simonyi's team. The product was inspired by Simonyi's previous work at Xerox PARC, the research arm of the photocopier company. While early computers required the user to type command line inputs, Xerox had developed a graphical user interface, or GUI, in which items on a computer screen could be accessed and moved by a pointer using a physical device known as a mouse. Microsoft Word operated along these principles, with space on the screen divided into sections called windows, enabling users to work on 8 documents at the same time. While Word was developed for the IBM PC, it could also be used on other computers. In June 1983, Gates and Ballmer wrote an important memo announcing that Microsoft would focus on software for GUI operating systems. Steve Jobs at Apple had also recognized that the intuitive GUI was the future of computing and was developing a GUI-based operating system for the new Macintosh. While Microsoft signed a deal with Apple in January 1982 to produce software for the Mac, the company planned to develop its own operating system for the IBM PC called Windows. As with the Altair Basic, this meant that Microsoft stood to gain no matter who emerged victorious in the latest round of innovation. To accelerate the project, Gates poached several developers from Xerox PARC who had worked on the GUI but felt that the company's corporate culture was stifling innovation. Gates and Ballmer persuaded Xerox programmer Scott McGregor to join Microsoft and lead the project. Microsoft's announcement of Windows in November 1983 prompted Steve Jobs to accuse Gates of stealing the concept of the GUI after seeing it in development at Apple's headquarters. When the Mac was launched in January 1984, it was accompanied by an advertising campaign that portrayed Apple as the resistance against IBM and Microsoft. While Jobs was concerned by the threat from Microsoft, the development of Windows was delayed as Gates hurried to ensure that Microsoft software would become the default for GUI applications. Microsoft had been developing a spreadsheet program for PC called Excel, and the strategic pivot forced the programmers to start from scratch to write a version for the Mac. When Microsoft announced Excel in May 1985, Steve Jobs spoke at the event to endorse the product. After its launch in September, Excel quickly blew all the competition out of the water. Although Excel for Mac was a major success for both Apple and Microsoft, the Windows operating system was still not ready. The company's vision to enable users to run several applications at a time proved too ambitious and required far more memory than the 256 kilobytes available in the latest generation of IBM PCs. Gates required his employees to work punishing hours. Newcomers from Xerox were shocked by Gates and Ballmer's tendency to shout at colleagues. Windows was initially expected to launch in March 1984, but as the release date kept being pushed back, company representatives were forced to apologize to prospective clients who had staked their future on developing software for Windows. The delay was exacerbated by Gates' tendency to micromanage the smallest detail. While the changes usually improved the product, it demoralized the development team. A year into the project, Gates decided that Windows still needed to be operable using a keyboard for customers who were unwilling to use a mouse. In response to his micromanaging and the problems it was causing, in August 1984, Gates was persuaded by John Shirley to remove himself from day-to-day decision-making. As 1984 moved into 1985, Gates continued to issue embarrassing statements pushing back the release date and losing credibility within the industry. With major hardware manufacturers jumping ship and IBM developing its own GUI called Top View, Gates appointed Ballmer to manage the project. Although Ballmer had no coding experience whatsoever, his unrelenting pressure on developers resulted in the launch of Windows 1.0 on the 21st of November 1985, an anticlimactic affair following which Gates was mocked by trade journalists for having failed to live up to his own grandiose promises regarding the product. Although Gates had insisted on making a superior product to the others that had beaten Windows to market, Windows 1.0 was a flop and crashed regularly. The release of Windows 2.0 in December 1987 also failed to have much of an impact, and it was only with Windows 3.0 in 1990 that Microsoft's operating system set the industry's standard. Meanwhile, although the Apple Macintosh would in hindsight be regarded as the device which accelerated the personal computing revolution, sales of the Mac slumped after a few months, leading to a boardroom struggle in which Apple President John Sculley ousted Steve Jobs. In early 1985, Gates and Sculley signed an agreement to clear up disagreements after Apple's threat to sue Microsoft for stealing the GUI prompted a counter-threat from Gates to stop developing Word and Excel for the Mac. In March 1986, Microsoft went public at $21 per share. Despite negative press about Windows, its shares rallied to $27.75 by the end of the day. While the company was generating healthy profits from sales of MS-DOS and did not need the extra capital, the IPO raised an additional $61 million. A few weeks after the IPO, when Microsoft traded at around $35 a share, Gates' stake was worth $350 million. Within a year of going public, Microsoft stock reached over $90 a share, making Gates the youngest billionaire in American history. Although Gates had hoped to keep the company small and agile, it had 1,200 employees at the time of the IPO, or initial public offering. Microsoft accommodated them by moving its headquarters to a campus at nearby Redmond. There, Gates insisted that the company's supervisors grade team members every 6 months. Anyone who scored in the lowest 5% was dismissed. The policy was not officially confirmed by Microsoft until it was scrapped in 2013. While Microsoft was working on Windows 2.0, it was also developing a version of the software for IBM called Presentation Manager. Fearing that the new operating system would outcompete the Mac, Apple filed a lawsuit in March 1988 alleging that Microsoft had stolen the GUI from Apple. Gates found the situation ridiculous, since the GUI had actually been invented by Xerox, a fact which Microsoft had never denied. Microsoft filed a countersuit claiming that Apple had broken the terms of their 1985 agreement, while Xerox filed its own copyright lawsuit against Apple in 1989. After several years of litigation, both lawsuits were eventually dismissed, costing all three firms exorbitant legal fees. While Gates continued to promote Windows 2.0 in public, he instructed his developers to focus on Windows 3.0. Unlike Windows 2.0, the third generation of the operating system was designed to be compatible with the 66% of the machines on the market that ran on DOS. Microsoft spent $3 million on the launch event of Windows 3.0 in May 1990. On this occasion, the hype was justified, and Windows 3.0 became the fastest-selling software product in history. Then, in October 1990, the company launched Microsoft Office, a suite of 3 products: Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. The combination of Windows 3.0 and Microsoft Office not only enabled customers to access a computer with the same capabilities as a Mac at much lower cost, it also allowed Microsoft to effectively abandon its partnership with IBM. Work on developing Presentation Manager ended early in 1991. Microsoft's newly acquired status as the giant of the computer industry attracted attention from the US Federal Trade Commission, which launched an investigation into the company in March 1991. Gates was widely criticized in the press for employing aggressive negotiating tactics and using Microsoft's dominant position in the market to bully smaller companies to accept its terms. As the scope of the probe expanded, the FTC also examined allegations that Microsoft had stolen the intellectual property of smaller companies that it was negotiating to acquire. While the controversy impacted Microsoft's stock price, Gates was unconcerned, arguing that Microsoft stock was due a correction, and the fall in his net worth did not affect his day-to-day activities. In answering his critics, Gates argued that software development was a highly competitive environment and that Microsoft's dominance was not guaranteed to last. Microsoft's aggressive business practices were motivated by the fear that others would catch up, and Gates told the Wall Street Journal in an interview that, "You always have to be thinking about who is coming to get you." In their 1993 book, Hard Drive, Bill Gates and the Making of the Microsoft Empire, authors quoted an executive from a Microsoft rival who said, "I wish he'd get married and have a couple of kids so he couldn't work as many hours as he does." Following a couple of serious relationships in the early 1980s, Gates met Melinda French in 1987. She had recently joined the company and gradually made her way up the ranks while dating its chairman and chief executive. The couple were married on New Year's Day 1994 at a private ceremony in Hawaii. Their first child, a daughter named Jennifer, was born 2 years later in April 1996. Their son, Rory, followed in May 1999, and their youngest child, Phoebe, was born in September 2002. A few months after his wedding, Gates' mother, Mary, died of cancer in June 1994 at the age of 65. An influential philanthropist herself, Mary had urged her son to use his extraordinary wealth for charitable activities. In 1994, Gates and his father, Bill Gates Sr., established the William H. Gates Foundation. The charity was slow to take off, since Bill Gates was still hard at work at Microsoft, seeking to defend the company's market position. In May 1995, he issued a memo to staff predicting that the Internet would revolutionize computing. While Microsoft was in the process of developing its own Internet browser to challenge market leader Netscape Navigator, Gates was concerned that competitors would develop cheaper hardware that would allow users to connect to the Internet without a computer. Gates' anxieties would eventually come to pass, but Microsoft would increase its dominance of the software market with the release of Windows 95 in August 1995, a runaway success that sold 40 million copies in its first year. Meanwhile, Windows' great rival, Apple, had struggled to make much headway after Steve Jobs left the company. In a desperate effort to turn the company around, in 1997 Apple invited Jobs to return as CEO. With Apple desperately in need of cash, Microsoft stepped in as an unlikely savior and invested $150 million in non-voting shares alongside a wide-ranging agreement to provide Microsoft Office and Internet Explorer for the Mac. When the deal was announced by Apple, Gates appeared on video link projected onto a large screen, dwarfing Jobs at the podium. Although the deal proved a vital lifeline for Apple, both Gates and Jobs later regretted how the event was staged. A few months after the Apple deal, the U.S. Department of Justice launched a fresh antitrust case against Microsoft. The latest probe focused on Microsoft's practice of including Internet Explorer as the default browser in copies of Windows shipped to third-party manufacturers. Microsoft was providing the browser for free at a time when competitors typically charged for the software, prompting claims that it was using its financial muscle to drive competitors out of business. Microsoft argued that Internet Explorer was a tool integrated into the Windows operating system that made it convenient for users to connect to the Internet rather than having to download a new browser. While Gates was never called to testify at the trial, in his deposition to federal lawyers in August 1998, Gates appeared defensive and evasive, often responding, "I don't know," or "I don't recall," to questions about his own email correspondence in which he discussed undermining competitors. In November 1999, a decision was reached that Microsoft had abused its monopoly position and, in the process, had limited consumer choice by making Internet Explorer the default Internet browser on computers running Microsoft's operating systems. Microsoft challenged an order to break up the company in June 2000. While the appeals court upheld the finding that Microsoft had violated antitrust laws to harm competitors, by the time the case returned to the district court, a new judge had been appointed who came to a different conclusion. Under the final judgment issued in November 2002, Microsoft avoided being broken up, although it was subject to new limitations and agreed to enable non-Microsoft applications to run on Windows at startup. By the time of the final judgment, Gates had relinquished the post of CEO to his longtime lieutenant, Steve Ballmer, though he continued as chairman and retained executive functions as chief software architect. Gates had time to devote to his philanthropic activities, which expanded significantly with the launch of the Gates Library Foundation to provide free Internet access in U.S. public libraries in 1997. The same year, Gates began his 10-year reign as the world's richest man. Gates' philanthropy also extended to supporting healthcare in developing countries, where millions were dying from treatable diseases. In 2000, the two Gates charities merged to form the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In 2003, the foundation launched an initiative to fund research for diseases prevalent in developing countries. The millions spent on global health and education initiatives enabled the Gates Foundation to develop expertise on the ground, encouraging other wealthy Americans to support its work. Gates had been friends with legendary investor Warren Buffett since the 1990s and replaced Buffett's late wife, Susan, on the board of Berkshire Hathaway in 2004. 2 years later, Buffett joined the Gates Foundation as a trustee and pledged more than $30 billion to its causes. In 2010, Buffett joined Bill and Melinda Gates to launch the Giving Pledge, an initiative to encourage America's wealthiest families to give away most of their wealth to charity. As Gates dedicated more of his time to philanthropy, Microsoft's dominance of the software industry was at risk. Following the success of Windows 95, Microsoft continued to release new versions of Windows, including Windows 98 in June 1998 and Windows XP in August 2001. While both operating systems continued to dominate the market, Microsoft gradually lost market share to Apple after Steve Jobs turned the company's fortunes around. By the turn of the 21st century, Apple users had access to a powerful suite of creative tools, albeit at a higher price point than most Windows PCs. While Gates later argued that Microsoft's struggles were partly caused by the limitations imposed by the federal government, the company had missed opportunities beyond personal computers. Gates had long believed that the development of microchip technology in line with Moore's law would enable devices to become ever smaller. While promoting his initiative to provide free Internet access in libraries, Gates had predicted that books and newspapers would be increasingly digitalized. However, when Microsoft developers created a prototype e-reader in 1998, Gates decided against further development on the basis that the full-screen reader did not share the design language of Microsoft Windows. It would be another 9 years before Amazon released the Kindle, the world's most popular e-reader. Microsoft was also slow to respond when Apple launched the iPod in 2001. It remained on the sidelines for another 5 years until launching the Zune in 2006 in partnership with Toshiba. Despite being more affordable than the iPod, the Zune was a much larger device and struggled to challenge Apple's dominance. The product line was discontinued in 2011. Alongside its failure to challenge the iPod, Microsoft also missed a major opportunity in the smartphone market. The launch of the iPhone in June 2007 gave consumers the ability to make phone calls, browse the internet, and listen to music on a single handheld device. The high price of Apple products created an opportunity for software companies to develop an operating system that would set the standard for non-Apple smartphones. The following year, search engine giant Google released a smartphone running its Android operating system. While Microsoft had an operating system for portable devices, its Windows Phone operating system was not launched until October 2010 and ultimately failed to challenge the Apple Android duopoly. While Gates had transitioned away from his day-to-day responsibilities between 2006 and 2008, he later blamed his own management failures for Microsoft losing out on the $400 billion smartphone market. During the early 2010s, Microsoft would also lose out to Google in the web browser market. Internet Explorer initially faced a strong challenge from Mozilla Firefox, and its market share declined from nearly 70% in 2007 to just over 50% by January 2010. Meanwhile, Google Chrome, launched in September 2008, quickly gained market share to overhaul both Internet Explorer and Firefox by the second half of 2012. Internet Explorer and its successor Microsoft Edge would go on to fall into third place behind Apple's Safari browser. While Windows remained the dominant operating system for PCs, the release of Windows Vista in 2007 proved a disappointment after 5 years of development. Microsoft followed up with the popular and user-friendly Windows 7 in 2009, but the release of Windows 8 in 2012 prompted an outcry owing to the removal of the Start menu, which was reinstated in 2013 with Windows 8.1. In 2014, Steve Ballmer retired as CEO of Microsoft, while Gates stepped down as chairman but remained on the board as an advisor to the new chief executive, Satya Nadella, who had led the company's rapidly expanding cloud computing division. Under Nadella's leadership, Microsoft experienced a revival by doubling down on its Microsoft Azure cloud business. While Gates has warned of the risks of artificial intelligence, Microsoft is also at the forefront of AI development with a 49% stake in OpenAI. The recovery in Microsoft's stock price enabled Gates to reclaim his position as the world's richest man on several occasions, most recently in 2019. Most of Gates' Microsoft stock was transferred to the Gates Foundation, which continues to be committed to improving global health. It is, for example, a leader in global efforts to eradicate polio through vaccination, successfully eliminating the disease from Southeast Asia in 2014 and from Africa in 2020. Gates also remains a leading advocate for transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy, which he argues would not only make energy cleaner, but cheaper and more reliable. He launched initiatives to increase government and private spending on research and development of green technologies at the 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris, which resulted in a landmark international agreement to limit global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. His current business interests include a nuclear reactor design company called TerraPower and a Canadian company researching carbon capture technologies. During the Biden administration, Gates lobbied for major climate change legislation, which became the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Bill Gates' transformation from a ruthless tech executive to a leading philanthropist championing worthy causes contributed to a significant improvement in his public image. However, since 2020, Gates' reputation has suffered following a series of revelations about his personal life. In 2019, the New York Times reported that Gates had visited convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein on several occasions since first meeting in 2011. Gates denied any friendship with the disgraced financier and said that he had been seeking to persuade Epstein to contribute to his philanthropic causes and regretted spending time with him. In March 2020, Gates stepped down from the boards of Microsoft and Berkshire Hathaway. While Gates claimed that he had done so to focus on philanthropy, the Wall Street Journal reported in May 2021 that Gates had been investigated over an extramarital affair with a Microsoft employee. On the 3rd of May that year, Bill and Melinda announced their intention to divorce, which was finalized in early August. In June 2024, Melinda stepped down as co-chair of the couple's charitable foundation, which was officially renamed the Gates Foundation. Although the foundation played a major role in the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and spent over $2 billion on testing, treatment, and vaccine development across the world, Gates was criticized for refusing to join the campaign for pharmaceutical companies to waive intellectual property rights to accelerate the deployment of vaccines. Meanwhile, Gates was also the subject of conspiracy theories on social media that claimed he was responsible for the pandemic and planned to use it to implant humans with microchips via vaccines, prompting Gates to comment that he had better things to do than track random individuals. Gates contributed to Kamala Harris's presidential campaign in 2024 and has criticized the Trump administration's cuts to the international aid budget via USAID. Bill Gates turned 70 on the 28th of October 2025, and there may be more chapters in his life story to come. His 2025 memoir, Source Code, has provided many hitherto unknown details of his early years, and more biographical details will come to light as he plans further installments covering his work at Microsoft and his philanthropy. His legacy to date already makes him one of the most influential businessmen in world history, as well as a philanthropist who has financed a wide range of initiatives from global health to climate change. It is a curious rise in some ways. As a child, he struggled at school. However, his ability in mathematics fueled his interest in computing in the 1970s, when the invention of the silicon microprocessor heralded the dawn of a new age of personal computing. Having already been involved in several computing projects as a teenager, Gates founded Microsoft alongside his school friend Paul Allen in 1975. Microsoft's partnership with IBM enabled its MS-DOS operating system to become the industry standard. During the 1980s, Microsoft developed Word and Excel and launched Windows, which continue to dominate parts of the personal computing software market. Microsoft's control of the market, particularly during the 1990s, fueled widespread condemnation of Gates' aggressive business tactics and led to a high-profile federal antitrust case that nearly resulted in Microsoft being broken up. In the early 21st century, Microsoft began losing ground to Apple and Google in smartphone and web browser technology. Nevertheless, Gates remained the richest man in the world and expanded his philanthropic activities. Yet, while the Gates Foundation played a key role in international efforts to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic and continues to do vital work internationally, Bill's personal reputation has been damaged by revelations of extramarital affairs and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. In short, he is a complex individual who continues to divide opinion. What do you think of Bill Gates? Is he one of the greatest entrepreneurs and philanthropists in history who has changed the world through Microsoft and by using his wealth to improve the lives of impoverished people around the world? Or is he a ruthless businessman whose success was achieved by allegedly stealing the innovations of his competitors? Please let us know in the comment section. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.